Yeah, don't take this impossible stuff seriously. Like, for example, I love it on this AGI. There's two people that have said exactly the same thing. They'll say the alignment problem in managing AGI is so difficult, it's probably impossible, but we got to try. Yeah. So I think that the people who I got to try are the people who made history, that we have, we're surrounded by things that were created by people that were probably told often than not, hey, it's impossible.
We're absolutely delighted, honored, privileged to have Dr. Jerome Glenn, all the way from Washington, D.C., joining us today on our Voices of the Future podcast. He is an amazing voice of the future, and today, during the session, you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. He comes up with insights and thoughts and contexts and perspectives that we just haven't been able to think about or look at. As a scenario planner, as a futurist, and as a deep thinker, he is one of the most amazing people I know, and really honored to have you here. Jerry, welcome. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. To your listeners, I'm Jerome Glenn. I've been involved in futures research for a long time. I've worked for right-wing, left-wing, up-wing, and down-wing think tanks. And in 1996, Ted Gordon and I, Ted Gordon was at the RAND Corporation and Institute for the Future and created the Futures Group. He gave you the third stage of the Apollo rocket to the moon. So when they say it doesn't take rocket science to do the Millennium Project, I say, yes, it does. And there he is. Anyway, the two of us started the Millennium Project in 1996 as a global participatory think tank that could create global futures research on an ongoing basis rather than just one-shot deal. We wanted to create a system of futures research to improve thinking about the future. And we now have 71 nodes around the world and produced 60, 70 research documents and state of the future reports. And now we're working on artificial general intelligence.
Artificial general intelligence is extremely topical and a hot subject these days. From your perspective, where are we in terms of where artificial intelligence, general intelligence is, and how rapidly do you think this is changing? And do we really even have an idea of how rapidly it's happening?
Well, by the time your Voices of the Future comes out, we will have finished a report on this question where we've taken 55 of the generally recognized top experts in the world, all of the names you can sort of think about, we put together. And from that pattern, addressing 22 questions, from that pattern, one of the things that's clearly a trend is we used to think, well, first of all, let's get our definitions right. You got three kinds of AI, and these three kinds get confused all the time, and it's driving me nuts. The first is narrow intelligence, single purpose. It's like ChatGPT. It's like, doing your car driving around. It's doing your taxes. But the thing that diagnoses cancer doesn't drive the car. So it's single purpose. It can be very complex single purpose. It can be all kinds of fancy stuff, but a single purpose. It's a tool. That's what we have today. We may have, and most likely will have, what we now refer to as artificial general intelligence. And that's more like an actor than just a tool. You could say to it, solve the problems in the Middle East. And it would go out and do all kinds of other stuff, make telephone calls, all kinds of stuff. It's more like a superhuman in a sense, acting, doing things, drawing on the Internet of Things, drawing on sensor networks worldwide, rewriting its own code when it finds out something doesn't work, does it a different way. It really is in a sense, it's a standalone human genius, essentially. And there won't be just one of these little fellas. There probably will be hundreds or thousands of these. They'll come out of China, they'll come out of Japan, they'll come out of Europe, they'll come out of the United States. They may be coming out of the United Arab Emirates pretty soon. So we don't know yet how to manage that. Now, it's not here yet. And that's one of the things that in our study, there's a trend. People thought the general intelligence would be maybe never, maybe 100 years, maybe 50 years, but certainly not 30 years or 20 years. But today, you get top experts who actually have their fingers on the keypad saying, this could happen even in 5 years or less. Now, if we don't get the management of this second form of AI right, then it will evolve into a super intelligence that would be beyond our control, beyond our understanding, beyond our awareness, that may or may not be okay for us.
Yeah.
So the only chance we have is not to manage it, is to manage the birth. It's like a parent, you get your 2 cents when the kid's growing up, but when they're an adult, forget it. You're not in charge anymore. So the only chance you have is how do you bring up the kid in a good way? Well, that's where we are today, between narrow intelligence, that's like the diapers, and the general intelligence, more like the teenager, trying on roles, doing all kinds of different stuff. And so we are a little worried that we might not put together the management structure for this fast enough. Because if we don't have a global system to manage it, then if it happens, it's not like other stuff where it occurs and then you figure out the mistakes and then you manage it. Now, there's some people who think that, but they're the minority. Yeah. Most of the experts say we got to have some stuff, guardrails, rules ahead of time. So when it comes up in a good way.
So I actually call artificial narrow intelligence in its current form, almost not even towards generative AI, as a weapon of mass destruction, just like nuclear weapons, because it can be quite destructive and used in the wrong way.
Right.
When we came up with nuclear fission 80, 90 years ago, all of the non-proliferation treaties started. The whole world got together. They had a discussion. It's not perfect, but it's sort of kept us away from nuclear war for at least the last 80, 90 years. And whether it's mutually assured destruction, whether it's however we've done it, and we've overcooked some of these places. We have too many nuclear missiles and so on. But the bottom line I'd like to talk about is that it is non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, which is as a weapon of mass destruction. What do we do for non-proliferation of artificial general intelligence uncontrolled? Is there a structure, will, thinking, and even desire to do that? Because the capitalist world just wants to make money out of it, and half the world is not a part of this process. So where are we on this?
Okay, one of the things that's a little different this time around is you have all those interests that you've talked about, and a lot of people says, how are you going to get that done? Well, there's something that's a little different this time. Even the people in China, in the study we're doing, we include Chinese as well as Russians and so forth. Everybody understands this is different. Like nuclear energy does not replicate itself.
Absolutely, that's exactly
nuclear energy does not reprogram itself into another chemical.
Correct.
Nuclear energy does not make decisions for a human being. I mean, it's a different, but we have to start with that. You're right. The International Atomic Energy Agency is a right place to begin the conversation, and then very quickly say, but it's got to be different. Now, by the time Voices of the Future comes out, hopefully we will have finished 2 more steps of our study. The next step is to take all this information and figure out what questions have not been answered well. What's still hanging out there that needs to be addressed? Then we send this out to a larger audience, which includes international lawyers and UN folks, because we want to talk about how you create the system. So we want to have the experts as well as the experts on international management systems, all right? So that hopefully gets done in the next few months. And then from those results, we hope to create alternative scenarios to say, Model A works this way, but not that way. Model B works this way, but not that way. So that we hope we will, by the time this comes out, have a report that can say, here is the framework of the conversation with detail and where it's weak and where it's not. And then essentially turn that over to the International Telecommunications Union, UNESCO, the UN Security Council, and everybody else, because then it's sort of out of our control. But right now, as I mentioned before, the conversation is lousy, it's ignorant, and it's confusing people. And so we were trying to get a system together to say, okay, let's structure this conversation in a more intelligent way because we don't have time to play around with this.
Yeah, I'll go one stage further. United Nations, World Bank, IMF, and all of the institutions that you mentioned, UNESCO, etc., World Health Organization, were created 80 years ago for issues 80 years ago, for things that were happening then. And that was the mindset. Now, incremental changes have happened, and I know they're trying really, really hard. But as we know, as futurists, it's near impossible to change from within. You need to create an edge on the side, a spin-off, perhaps like a Millennium Group, to take the lead and to go out there and sort of say, folks, you cannot do it in your existing system structure because the mindset's not there and that the immune system is going to attack it and block it.
Right.
Is that conversation happening?
Yes, but very embryonically. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that's at the crossroads of this within the UN system and organized crime, because that's another issue, by the way, organized crime is making trillions of dollars on cybercrime. They're not going to sit down and watch AGI evolve without them.
Yes.
Anyway, all this sort of stuff's got to be considered. One guy at the UN, which is at the intersection of these two things, organized crime and AGI, has said, essentially, we're the only people in town so far. But as soon as this stuff gets out with the questionnaires, I mean, there'll be a lot of people looking at it when that's the idea. We want to improve it. But yeah, I'm happy to report this will be old news by the time this comes out. But July 18th, the UN Security Council will have its first session on artificial intelligence. And we've made some suggestions about how they can make a distinction between narrow, general, and super. And the security implications are different for each.
I was looking at a chart which described the amount of knowledge ChatGPT-4 has actually gathered. It's about 90% plus of the way in terms of capturing all information that has ever been created in the world. So it's about 10% away. And by the time this book is out, I think it'll be at 100%. So now this type of environment, the ChatGPT environment, becomes omniscient, all knowing, completely knowledgeable. So when we have a tool or a repository which is all knowing and completely omniscient, then it starts becoming omnipotent, totally powerful, because that drives everything. So here's a scenario. Is that the end of advertising as we know? Because why would you want to advertise? Because you know exactly what things are. Is it the end of search engines as we know? Because what do you want to search anything? You just go in and say, ChatGPT, please tell me what's this and what's that, and it'll come up with a comprehensive, intelligent response. Is it the end of search engines and e-commerce as we know? Because why would we want a preferable red dress versus a black dress? You just put whatever is in there. Where I'm going with this is that businesses that in our lifetimes we have seen exploding in terms of opportunity that they created, but also completely absorbing our lives, whether it's news and media, advertising, search, and recommendation engines. This thing is threatening all of that, which basically means everything starts crumbling. It's obviously it's sort of moving from steam engines to electricity. How do you visualize that?
We did some scenarios anticipating some of these questions in a report called Work Technology 2050, Scenarios and Actions. And we roughly calculated, and these are rough calculations, that by 2050, you'll have a workforce, assuming that the longevity breakthroughs don't happen a whole lot, but with just trend sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You have like around 9 to 10 billion people, 6 billion in the workforce. The workforce will also change by then, but again, we're just projecting trend projections here. Of the 6 billion, we figure you'll still need about 1 billion running the system of civilization. They sort of have jobs, they sort of have bosses. They'll work in tandem with artificial general intelligence at this point, and all of that. But what about the other 5 billion people, which is the lion's share you're talking about here? And as best as we can tell, one of the best ways to do this, the next evolution, could what we would call a self-actualization economy. People aren't used to the idea of making a living being themselves. You happen to do it, and so do I. But we are the tiny minority. but eventually that'll have to become the majority. And since you'll have all these artificial intelligence things at your disposal, you can really develop yourself and find markets for you worldwide. You know, if you're interested in scratching your nose, all right, how many people are interested in scratching the nose in the world? Well, social media is slowly getting at this, but then you can eventually monetize that. So you have your AI avatar. It goes running around the world while you're sound asleep, creating smart contracts for you. And in the morning wakes you up and says, here's a bunch of stuff you want to do that's cool. Here's a bunch of stuff that you can make some money on, and the smart contracts ready to be signed, so that you literally become free. The AI, think of our body. Our body has all this autonomic nervous system with a heartbeat, all of that. That's single purpose AI. The lung system, circulatory system, respiratory system, skeletal, all this sort of stuff. They're narrow AI. And then the brain is like the general AI. Okay. But we had to have civilization of our body, not civilization in the world, run by all these systems to free us up. That's how the brain got to be creative, to be freer. If we had to worry about digestion and heartbeat, we could not have time to do this. So imagine civilization, maybe just the 5 out of the 6, free enough to develop themselves, to act on causes that they don't have time to act on right now. But if you have that freedom to create yourself, this is a very exciting potential world. Now, yes, the unemployment stuff looks like 2030, 2035, depends on how AGI comes in, because a lot of times technology will be here, but it takes a while to get it going. So there'll be a lot of people employed in hand-holding people, how you can use this stuff, how you work with it. All kinds of consultants will make all kinds of work, as they should, doing that. But essentially, people will start to get the idea that, what do I do between birth and death? Am I just going to fit in somewhere? Do we have an education system that teaches me to fit in? Or is it going to be an education system and an employment system where I invent myself, where I create myself? So I think that's the direction we're going in.
Jerry, can we take a step back, and could you just share a little bit about your life? What has brought you to this point in your life? What are the big achievements, big failures, big challenges that you have encountered, which has shaped your thinking and shaped your knowledge for what you are doing today? And please share with us what scenario analysis and scenario planning actually means.
Let me address your last one first, because that's one of my bugaboos. I had the pleasure of working with Herman Kahn, who invented scenarios, working with about 10 years off, and we were friends as well. And he would roll over in his grave if he would see how, quote, scenario planning is done today. The original reason for scenarios was not to find what strategy is robust in alternative futures. The purpose was to find out what you didn't know, that you didn't know, for futures that are possible, that may not be possible, because when you find out, that's not a possible future. Don't worry about it, because a scenario is a story, first of all. So when they say the narrative of the scenario, that's like saying the unmarried men are bachelors. No kidding. A scenario is a story that connects the present to a future condition. What most future planners do, they give you future conditions. That's perfectly fine. But how did you get there? Is that a logical connection? Because when you write a story, any writer will tell you, you get to a point I have no idea what happens next. Well, in scenario work, you stop writing and do research. For example, in the Rand Corporation, they had to look at alternative futures to prevent World War III. That was the job. All right. Now, what happens if no nuclear war for 20, 30, 40 years, which turned out to be the case? How do you convince the unknown that you're crazy enough to press the button? Right? For that scenario to be plausible, you have to show how the other side says, oh my God, they're going to press the button, we won't do it. Right? Well, how do you prove that in a scenario? So they had to stop writing. And then that's how fallout shelters came into place. By having a fallout shelter program, you could show in an emergency like Cuba, if the ships didn't turn around, you go, everybody go to fallout shelters. Well, if you're sitting there in Moscow and you're watching television, you see massive traffic jams in Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. What do you think? Those crazy Americans are going to go to war. Pull the ships back. That was the purpose, but you couldn't say it during the Cold War. But we wouldn't have done that had we not, if we just did endpoints. So one of the things I would ask your audience to do when you talk about scenarios, write a story between the present and a future condition with cause and effect links and decisions with name, rank, and serial number. And then you start to say, oh, you can't get from here to there unless you had an international treaty, or you can't get there from here unless you had a new invention. You can't get there from here. That's the purpose of a scenario. The ultimate purpose is to make you smarter about what's possible.
Do you teach this at universities and schools? Do we learn about this? Because what you're talking to me now, what I'm hearing, is critically important, particularly in today's world, for boards and CEOs and stuff like that to actually understand this properly and to be able to apply it.
As you probably remember, we did create and continue to create a Futures Research Methodology series. It's 3.0 at this point. And in there, scenarios explained in this way. And a lot of universities around the world buy this things for the professors who then teach methodology stuff in different universities. So yeah, it does. And when somebody asks me questions, just like you did, then I do my little harangue.
It doesn't seem to be very mainstream. I think design thinking is much more there. Various other techniques, very seldom, other than maybe at Shell when they were doing their scenario planning and so on.
And Herman was the guy that brought scenarios to them. A lot of people forget that little detail.
Okay, so what do we need to do, and how should we actually start getting key people, CEOs, chairmen, boards, and others to start thinking about this and adopting it so that they can make some sensible decisions? Because at the moment, it's either the immune system clicks in and they say no, and they keep blocking and delaying and hoping it goes away when we know it won't go away. Or they get clumsy consultants coming in and showing them ways from very, very narrow and short-term sort of structures and just get the invoices paid.
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to hear a little reverberation where people start to say, I noticed, well, these, we're going to do cause and effect scenarios as if they're the different ones. But nevertheless, that's progress. That's progress. Yeah. What were the other scenarios? Not cause and effect. They were just effect, and that's it. No, it's a struggle, and I've just recently sort of taken it on as a cause like this, where I just never mentioned it. I figured, like, let people do what they're doing. That's fine. The serious work will be done the other way.
Yeah. So my thought is that the tension between short-term, long-term has always been there in this field. 10 years ago, life was a little bit simpler because the computers were a little bit slower and the data was a little bit less impactful and AI wasn't quite there. So life was simpler. Now it's accelerated exponentially. Quantum computers are around the corner, and all sorts of new things are happening. So suddenly what used to happen in 10 years is probably happening down in 1 month. And what's going to be happening in 20 years is going down to 1 year. How do business leaders think through that environment?
Well, I think I do bring this up recently in a couple of corporations. One of the things that I've suggested is that you have an evolution of religion organizing society, then government managing society. Religion's still there. Now corporations, you build on top of that. So they don't replace each other. They're just new forms of power. So corporations have to realize they're now much of the muscle in the world. Like, for example, people talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Fine. Governments don't have enough money to address it. Most of the money is in the private sector investment houses. That's the muscle. So they've got to realize they're the ones that are going to be doing these things, not necessarily governments will do their part, but the real muscle's coming out of the private sector. Okay, fine. So what are some new paradigms for them to think in terms of? Right now, we teach in business schools competitive intelligence, competitive analysis, competitive advantage, etc. We also should teach synergetic intelligence. Exactly. What the hell is that? Yeah. You're talking about new paradigms? Take the world. Right now, the world is zero-sum power game, right?
Yeah.
Your increasing power means I have less power. That's the game today. We've got to shift the game eventually to synergy. Why? Because zero-sum means conflict forever, in one form or another. Well, at some point with the AGIs and artificial general intelligence, we got a serious problem. So we can't continue this paradigm. Now, we're doing a little experiment with South Asia, by the way. You're from Pakistan, yes?
Yes.
I got Pakistan asking the question, what is the synergetic relationship potential with India?
Yeah.
The brain goes, wait a minute, we never thought about that. So this is the same with businesses. A business can say, look at the playing field of the world and say, okay, what are synergetic relationships potentially for us in the world? You're not going to have thousands of them, but you may have 2 or 3. Well, then you get into a next game. Now, one quick pause. When I say synergy, I don't mean cooperation. By synergy, it's like Bucky Fuller would say, you take a wheel, you put it in a box, you get nothing. You take the wheel out of the box, put it underneath it, you get a wheelbarrow. So the synergy is a new thing altogether. It's a relationship of things to make a new thing. Like, for example, the synergy between the United States and China on AI could be a co-chair of the international management system regulations on this sort of stuff that others can join in. That's a new thing. It's a new synergy. That's an important one where the elements together are actually important. So one of the things I do say to the business community, begin to think about, and the business schools, as a matter of fact, what would synergetic intelligence look like?
Yeah.
What would synergetic advantage look like? What's a synergetic strategy, etc.? Now, imagine you got 2 businesses. One is doing zero-sum, the normal competition, and all things being equal, other than the other one doing the synergetic analysis. Run the program for 10 years. Who's winning?
Which brings us to another segue, Jerry, going back to where it all started. I mean, you sound very articulate today, but what made you who you are today? What are the key components in your life?
Like a tree's got a whole mess of roots, right? I would say one of them was in 7th grade. I remember the science teacher or the math teacher saying this, an offhand comment, not all of mathematics has been invented yet. I went, what? You got geometry, you got trigonometry, you got, what the hell else is there to invent? How can you invent the future of mathematics? I mean, my whole poor brain just went in all kinds of different directions. So that was one part of it. Another part, as when I was doing my master's degree, I got an invitation from the state of Vermont. They wanted to, quote, invent the future. This is like 1970, 71. They want to invent the future of education for Vermont. And then and they said, you're going to meet at ski lodges. So I'm a poor graduate student. So of course the answer is yes. And before I get there, they send me a box of Xeroxes from people like Buckminster Fuller, Herman Kahn, etc. And I sat down, and 3 hours later, I got up from reading all this stuff. I went, this is the most interesting stuff I've ever heard about. And then it dawned on me that all this future methodology stuff was a way to take vast amounts of information and package it for a decision. I said, well, shucks, education should have something to do with that. So then I invented a field called futuristic curriculum design, where I took futures methods and then turned them into teaching techniques. That's where the futures wheel came from, and a bunch of other sort of stuff came from. So that got me a national reputation for that. And then one thing led to another, and then I got into general futures after that.
So people who are working, can you just tell us also about the Millennium Group and what that does and how the nodes work internationally?
Yeah, the Millennium Project was the idea back in the 80s. If the year 2000 is going to hit and futurists will be interviewed, guys like you will stick microphones down our throat and say, what's coming up in the next 1,000 years or so? And so there was Ted, my partner, wanted to do a mega study. I said, no, we need a mega system. We did a 3-year feasibility study. I don't know if anybody's ever done a 3-year feasibility study, even on the Apollo project. Anyway, we did a 3-year feasibility study. This is still the Cold War was beginning at that time, or still going on at that time. How do you create a global think tank? I mean, it's a beautiful idea, but how do you do it? And so out of the feasibility study came this idea of nodes. and think of a node as an intersection of different interests and different networks. You know, some government, some business, some university, etc. So that a hierarchy is the old management system, still the majority of the world. Then networks cut across the up and down control of a hierarchy. But then the intersection of networks, the node becomes more intelligent than the network itself because you're integrating stuff. And then, so what we're doing now, we got 71 of these nodes around the world. We're also creating regional groups of these nodes. So these become like fields of play, so to speak, and they create their own stuff. Latin American, scenarios independent of me. They do it themselves. And then we'll hopefully hook up these fields of play around the world in an interdependent way, in a synergetic way, so that it's not clear who's in charge. So we'd like to have the Millennium Project as an ongoing capacity to improve thinking about the future. And it just keeps on learning from feedback and keeps on going with its own momentum and make it so complex. Is not so vulnerable, like nature. You got a same idea.
Indeed. You did a special project and you had a very interesting initiative with the United Nations. Can you share some of that with us and how United Nations currently is actually getting into the 21st century?
Well, for the record, we came out of the United Nations University during the feasibility study and kept the UN relationship. So we've done actually a fair amount. We helped with the UN's world water scenario. We've done a lot of stuff for the UN in different ways. But I think what you're referring to is the foresight elements of
the five components.
This is a gigantic thing that I'd love your viewers to lobby their own governments about. The Secretary General knows how to spell the word future. I mean, you don't have to tell him squat. He's right there. He's got it all. I mean, from the space stuff to what I'm talking about, this energy, he's got it all. So he put it in a document called Our Common Agenda. And there are 5 foresight elements in there. And so we did a study of how you would implement these 5 elements. And that's in play at the moment. And one of the things that your listeners should prepare for is that in 2024, in September, there will be a UN summit on the future, the big general future. If we simply come up with whatever hobby horse or whatever crusade we've been working on before, and we say, I'm dealing with the disabled and the future. I'm dealing with water and the future. Then that means that we will have wasted the summit. We've got to look at the big picture of the future of civilization. Anything less than that is a waste of time because we've already got all kinds of unit agencies for all the rest of these things are already there. We don't have anything for the whole system, the whole species. There's nothing for that in any serious way. And so Secretary General has initiated this. So I hope your viewers will get their ministers of foreign affairs to say something interesting rather than say, well, we want to have a peaceful future.
Yes, indeed. And I hope there is some awakening and through this process. I'm going to say something which is controversial and not very well received generally, is that COVID, the pandemic happened, and the whole world went into a reset. My thinking at a very skeptical level is that perhaps if it had lasted another year or two and had deeper impressions of the world so that we could have come out from it having learned something, and really redesigned our own thinking, as opposed to as soon as it finished, it's back to the future, it's back to the same old shit, and then off we go to the races. So the way I'm going with this question is that, did we learn enough? And what do we need to do to plan for these future scenarios and future pandemics? And what do we need to do to learn something, to do a mindset shift? Because I don't see anything happening.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, one of the first things, the first State of the Future report Millennium Project wrote in 1990, came out in 1997, was that given the population, transportation, etc., it's inevitable that civilization as we know it will come to a grinding halt because of global pandemic. That statement obviously is still valid today. And have people created a global early warning system? No. Bill Gates, bless his little old soul, said, people, look how much money we put into preventing nuclear war. and we're not even sure that's going to happen. And look how much money we put into preventing a pandemic, which we are sure will happen at some point again.
Yeah.
You know, so right on that side, that learning has not really happened, in my judgment. A lot of talking, but I haven't seen a global system yet. There's some early warning systems that are being put into place, but yeah, anyway, so that's one. Two, I would say that we did rethink a lot, including, do I really want to fit into this dumb job? United States, I don't know about the rest of the world, but the United States, well, there's a whole lot of job replacements going on and shifting of jobs. So that's one positive thing. People said, like, what do I want to do with my life? Rather than rushing from get into the university, get into the job, get into kiss the boss's butt, etc., and get out of here, you know? That rethinking is very much alive, I think. I would be nice if it was alive, more alive, but it is a phenomenon. And secondly, we've been talking about saving energy from working at home forever. Well, that has been done. I mean, that message has gotten through. You don't have to have everything in an office. Of course, that makes the real estate people and lunch people a nervous wreck in the middle of cities. But nevertheless, that phenomenon is here to stay. Almost every invitation I get to some other conference, it's a hybrid conference. No, that wasn't there before the pandemic. So we've had a little learning.
Yes, I think we did. My thesis is that the moment when we obviously adjusted 10-20%, but then we got back to the same old way of doing things, and culture and companies haven't really changed sufficiently, or not enough of them. So it's an opportunity lost. I think we could have used this for a real future reset and start on a clean slate, and we sadly didn't quite do that.
I would say one other thing I didn't mention, it did come up. Futurist activity jumped after the pandemic.
Yes. Yes.
And I think one was, God, these people are giving us warning. Gee, we should really think about the future, shouldn't we? So, I mean, for better or for worse, because a lot of a lot of irregular stuff is not that great. But the phenomena, I mean, the pandemic gave the futurist phenomena a big boost.
Yeah. But looking forward and building your voice into the future, Jerry, and as we look into that, what sort of top 3 to 5 trends, big trends, mega trends, meta trends do you see that we should be thinking about and working towards?
Okay. One is what I refer to as conscious technology. This is the idea that we micro-miniaturize everything, put it in our bodies, on our bodies, in everything built with AI and then general intelligence as well, so that the whole environment seems to be alive and conscious. And at the same time, we take all of our knowledge, which you have mentioned too well in the beginning of the show, getting all of our knowledge and ideas and so forth available to everybody and everything, so that the technology future and the human future merge. And the quality of that merger could very well be the mystic attitude toward life and the technocratic acknowledgement of life. Each have got to give up a little bit and have a plan. We're all, in a sense, part. When I say mystic, I don't mean religion or a cult. I mean enjoying the mystery of the universe, the delight of all of that. So that's an attitude that you bring in to the knowledge of the technocrat. So, because if you're going to merge human consciousness, the masters are mystics, and merge with the technology, and the masters are the technocrats. So you got, in a sense, 4 elements here. And I think that when we get to the point where it's a good example is a Chopin. Imagine you're playing a masterful piece, and at the end of the show, some guy like you comes up the microphone, crams it down the guy's throat, and says, "Well, how was the performance?" And they usually talk as if they were somehow at one with the composer, with the piano, with the music, with their fingers, with their mind, all together into a single integrated performance. Imagine if we could design civilization like that. How do we make civilization a performance of our evolution and our beauty? Make it, like an opera. The whole, you don't ask a trumpet to be a violin. So let everybody be the way they want. But how do you put it together into this conscious technologies? When I call you on a phone, like right now, you say and I say, we're talking to each other. but we're not. We're talking to a machine that talks to a machine that talks to a machine that talks to a machine that doesn't even talk. It's codes and so, and then finally out to your eyeballs and your ear, and you say we're talking to each other. Well, we just forget. So we have, in a sense, a flow of consciousness and technology right now.
Yeah, interesting.
It's a mini version, but imagine. So to me, that's one of the big trends of conscious technology coming up. The other one I've already mentioned is going from fitting in to inventing yourself in a synergetic, sort of, self-actualization world. And then the third is shifting the power dynamics of the world from zero sum to the synergy stuff. So I'd say those are conscious technology, self-actualization economy, and the synergy international affairs would be three big trends.
Brilliant. As we come towards the end, I'd like to go to what I call the more rapid fire questions, and questions that mean a lot to us. I always start my presentations with the element of trust as being the most important thing for the future. Question one, would you agree with that? That trust has become more of a premium now than ever before? Trust deficit in terms of companies,
yes. When the majority of everything you experience is artificially created, then trust is very important. How do I trust A versus B?
Yeah. The second area is truth and ethics. As all of these things are coming in, we touched upon generative AI. How do we infuse ethics and morality and a compass? And whose morality, and how do we define that? And
here's some good news. During the early internet, I was involved in getting the packet switching around in dictatorships in different countries around the world. And there was very little discussion about the technological impact. We didn't talk about silos thinking and all that. We just didn't. We just thought everything's going to be great. We're hooking up all these computers. Everything's great. What's to be discussed? What ethics would I deal with? Didn't think about it. But today, the next big jump is AI. When ethical conversations are all over the place. I'm trying to keep track of this stuff. My little eyeballs running out of my head. The whole world is having an ethical conversation about AI. This did not happen with internet at all. So I think that the evolution, but it starts with talk.
Yeah.
It starts with talk. I mean, Socrates would tell you it starts with talk. Hester philosophy came out of a little bit of talk.
Asking open questions we don't have answers for.
Right,
it's philosophy. Right. One of the definitions of philosophy.
Yeah.
Have you done any scenario analysis on things like cloning and genetic regeneration and reproduction and so on? We have a large enough population. I mean, can we create our digital twins and have another 8 billion people in the world doing all the hard work while we can sit and have our champagne?
Yeah, one of the things I've learned in years of futures research is whatever you look at, imagine it becoming more complex than you think is possible. Describe that, and then say, now double it, and you'll get closer to what actually is going on. I just got lost in the complexity there. What was the question again?
The question was that if we create ourselves a clone and a digital twin, and the digital twin does all the work, and we can just chill out and do our own thing. In other words, the dynamic of the world changes.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to what I've been talking about. Is self-actualization. Like, who are you? What do you want to do for real? If you got your digital twin, I mean, I think that's going to be the next big, like as email was the killer app in the past, I think the individual AI avatar will be the killer app of AI later on. But yeah, I think that is inevitable. But I don't see us wasting time as much as people think. There's been a lot of studies on the universal basic income. And it turns out the vast majority of the people where they do the experiments use it for something good. They create something. Most people don't want to be bored. I mean, maybe for a day or two, you want to be bored looking at the ocean and all that. That's fine. But after a while, you say, now, what am I going to do? Well, you'll have the ability to do a lot of stuff with all these new technologies you didn't have before. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa. Basically, when I was there, people had three choices. You're a farmer, you're a fisherman, or you're a witch doctor. That's it. Now, the choices are way all over the place. So we have a freedom. If humans were free, what would we be?
Yes, I think witch doctor could be an interesting option because that's something we might need for the future. Just to come to an end, Jerry, I know we're challenged for time. Critical question: Are you optimistic about the future?
You know, I always say you can't trust a futurist on that question. I mean, a serious futurist, because, for example, when I go to Europe, it tends to be more pessimistic than the United States.
Yes.
In Europe, I say, here's how it can work. And on the United States, this is what you got to worry about. So it depends. It's like a bedside manner.
And when you come to the Middle East, we're all on steroids. When we are, so.
Well, the Middle East is doing so many creative things. I tend to listen a little more.
Just talking to parents, mothers and fathers coming up with young children in their family. What is your advice to them? How do they nurture them? How do they grow, build their future?
Well, one, talk with your children about potential futures. The more you guess, the better you get at guessing. It's like anything else. That they also want to find out who they are rather than just fitting in. Because what you fit into, that thing may not be there later. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to train people how to fit in, to be polite, yes, and so forth. But to me, challenging the mind, like I've got children and grandchildren, and they know when they come to my place, they got to be thinking, because we'll talk about everything. But the idea is like we got to have brain building, like we got muscle building, right? We all know this, but we got to do brain building too, because the future is not going to be less simple. I'm afraid it's going to be more complex. So it'll be useful to have a inquiring, intelligent, curious, creative mind.
On that wonderful comment, Jerry, it's been an absolute delight. I know you and I can just gas away, for another hour, I'm sure. But we have touched on all sorts of things, and I'm so happy that you were able to make this session and give us some insights into what we can expect and what we should be thinking about. And building muscle, brain muscle, I think is one of the key things. We use a very, very small portion of our brain anyway. So I think getting into using all our intelligences rather than just few that we have used in the last century, I think would be one of the key ways of doing. Any final thoughts, any comments, anything I may have missed that you'd like to just drop in as a pearl of wisdom for us as a voice into the future?
Yeah, don't take this impossible stuff seriously. Like, for example, I love it on this AGI. There's two people that have said exactly the same thing. They'll say the alignment problem in managing AGI is so difficult, it's probably impossible, but we got to try. Yeah. So I think that the people who got to try are the people who made history, that we have, we're surrounded by things that were created by people that were probably told often than not, hey, it's impossible.
And the final message for this platform, for the Voices of the Future that you have so graciously been a part of. If you could just give a final comment. Did you enjoy this talk? How do you see the other people coming into this and joining in this conversation?
Well, I think this is a great idea. I'm looking forward to its production. And what I want is what patterns you see. You're the common denominator of all of this. What are the patterns that you see out of all of this sort of stuff that maybe we didn't see individually?
Jerry, we're getting to the top of the hour. Thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute privilege, and I shall get some of these things ready for you in the next week. And we'll roll a few of them out just as little snippets, get people warmed up. And we will get in touch with you to get a few of your pictures or anything that you want, and I'll send you the PDF of what your entry in the book would look like. And anything that you want to add in terms of a report or a supplement or your research or whatever, on our website, we can put as a link with the podcast some of the things we've discussed today.
Good. All right.
Very much indeed. Delighted, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Boy, right on schedule, more or less, very close.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All the
cheers.
best. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.